Please, sir, come help our mom in the hospital, please.
Calm down. I will help her.
Triplets beg Billionaire for their mother's rescue. The promise, once spoken, became the axis around which their world now turned. A new, frantic energy replaced the anxious silence. They were a team with a mission: to build a fortress of Kobo and Naira strong enough to protect their coming child. Chitty became a man possessed. His hours at the mechanic's workshop stretched longer, his hands moving with a new, urgent purpose as he changed tires and bled brakes. He took on extra jobs, becoming a Kiki driver in the evenings, navigating the chaotic, exhaust-filled arteries of Lagos under the orange glare of streetlights. The money was meager, a handful of crumpled notes damp with sweat at the end of a 16-hour day, but he handed it all to Adiz with a solemnity that made it feel like a sacred offering. Adiz, in turn, became the guardian of the fortress. She bought a small, lockable metal box, a June 12th biscuit tin, and placed it on the shelf above her mattress. Every evening, they would sit together and count the day's takings. A 50 naira note was smooth flat with reverence. Coins were stacked into careful towers. For hospital, she would say, dropping a coin in. For baby soap, Chitty would add, adding a stained 20 naira note. The tin began to have a voice, a soft, reassuring rustle of paper and metal when shaken. The subject of antenatal care was their first great test of this new austerity. A friend, Nkechi, who had recently had a baby, urged Adiz to go to the primary health center. "You must register. You must do scan to see how the Pekin day," she insisted. They went together, one humid Thursday morning. The queue was long, a slow-moving river of women in colorful wrappers, some tired, some chatting. When they finally saw the nurse, she was brisk, handing over a small packet of folic acid and iron supplements. "Come back next month. You need to do scan. It is important to check the baby's development." Adiz looked at Chitty. The unspoken question hung between them. The nurse quoted a figure. It was not an outrageous sum, but to them, it was a fortune. It was 2 weeks' worth of contributions to the biscuit tin. It was the cost of a second-hand Moses basket. It was a sack of rice. Outside, in the blinding sunlight, Chitty wiped his forehead. "That skin money," he began, his voice low. "Ada, if we use him now, what can we go do when the baby come? When we need to pay for the delivery itself? Or when we need to buy mama's milk?" He was voicing her own fears. The scan was a picture, a glimpse. The tin's contents were for survival. "They say the pregnancy is normal," Adiz said slowly, repeating the nurse's only physical check. "My body no day give me any serious trouble." "It's a waste," Chitty concluded, the decision hardening into strategy. "We day save for the child, not for picture. God go protect the womb. We no go throw money for wedding we no need." It was a gamble, a decision made from a position of profound scarcity. They chose concrete need over abstract assurance. The scan became the first of many wastes they would courageously avoid. And Adiz's body began to change. Within months, her belly was a proud, taut dome. But as the weeks passed, it didn't just grow, it expanded. It became a subject of wonder and commentary at the public tap where she fetched water. "Adiz, this your stomach nah like basketball," a neighbor woman chuckled. "You be like say you carry river inside," another teased. "Not twins be this oh. I can bet my last naira." Make Chitty prepare himself. Double blessing day come. Adiz would smile, a hand instinctively cradling the immense curve. The sheer size was sometimes uncomfortable, a deep, stretching sensation that stole her breath. She felt flutters and kicks, but they seemed to come from everywhere at once, a chaotic, bubbling activity. In her quiet moments, a sliver of doubt would pierce her resolve. What if something is wrong? What if the nurse was right? She would push the thought away, her hand finding the solid weight of the biscuit tin. Its rustle was her answer. They were saving for life, for the reality after the birth. That was the priority. Chitty, watching her navigate the room with her new, monumental shape, felt a surge of protective awe. He saw her wince sometimes, saw the effort it took to rise from the low bed. "You sure you no need to go back to that nurse?" he asked one night, his concern cutting through his exhaustion. Adiz shook her head firmly, patting her stomach. "This one na strong Pekin. Day kick well. We are saving, Chitty. Every kobo counts." Their world had narrowed to a single, all-consuming goal: fill the tin. They ate the same simple meals of beans and gari, day after day. A piece of meat was a luxury reserved for Sundays, and even then, it was small. They walked instead of taking a kiki. The scan, and all it represented, modern medicine's gaze into the mystery, was a door they firmly, fearfully, closed. Their faith was placed in God, in their growing savings, and in the formidable strength of Adi's young body, which carried its enormous, secret cargo through the heat and hardship of Lagos, one saved kobo at a time. The promise. The air in Adi's small room in Okoto was thick with the scent of burning mosquito coil and the distant, rhythmic pounding of fufu from a neighbor's kitchen. Outside, Lagos buzzed, a relentless symphony of honking danfos, shouting traders, and generator hum. But inside, a profound silence had taken root, one that seemed to swallow all sound since she'd seen the 2 lines on the pregnancy test stick. At 21, Adi's was all sharp angles and soft hopes. Her eyes, usually bright with plans for her hair-plaiting business, now held a storm of uncertainty. She sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers tracing the faded patterns on her wrapper. The weight in her belly wasn't physical yet, but it was there, a heavy, secret knowledge. Chitty was late. He was always a little late, a trait she used to find endearing, a sign of his busy hustle. Now, every passing minute felt like an eternity of judgment. When his knock finally came, 3 quick, familiar raps, her heart leapt into her throat. He entered, smelling of petrol, sweat, and the faint, sharp scent of the mechanic's workshop where he apprenticed. His smile was tired but genuine, fading only when he saw her face. "Ada, when day happen? You day look like person we see ghost." He dropped his stained canvas bag by the door. Adiz tried to speak, but the words stuck. She simply picked up the plastic test stick from the bedside table and held it out, her hand trembling slightly. The silence stretched, thin and taut as a wire. Chitty took it. He stared. His face, usually so animated, went perfectly still. The cheerful noise from the street outside seemed to mute. He slowly sank onto the room's only other piece of furniture, a rickety wooden chair. The plastic creaked under his weight. "You sure?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I go clinic yesterday." "Not true." Another long silence. Chitty ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, then down his face, as if trying to wipe away the news. His mind was a frantic ledger. Rent for this room was due. His Oga at the workshop paid him in promises and occasional peanuts. The money he sent to his mother in the village was already a struggle. A child. A child. The word echoed with terrifying implications. Hospital bills, diapers, baby clothes, school fees, and a future that was rushing at him like a speeding truck. "Chitty, say something," Adiz pleaded, her voice cracking. "I day think," he said, but it was more than thinking. It was a reckoning. That night, and for many nights after, Chitty lay awake on his own mattress in the boys' quarters he shared with 3 others, staring at a ceiling mapped with cracks that looked like hopeless roads. The pressure from his family in Omudioka was constant. When will you marry a proper wife from home? When will you build your father a house? This pregnancy was a complication he couldn't afford, a detour from a path that was already steep and rocky. He thought of asking her to end it. The words formed in his mind, cruel and practical. But then he would remember Adiz's laugh, the way her whole face lit up when she finished a complex cornrow style, the determined set of her shoulders. She was not a problem. She was a person. His person. For a week, he was a ghost, present but absent, eating little, speaking less. Adiz watched him, her own hope withering with each passing day. She prepared for the worst, for him to vanish or to utter the unforgivable suggestion. Then, one evening, he came to her room with a bag of sweet, juicy oranges, a small luxury. He sat her down, took her hands in his own, which were calloused and stained with grease. "Ada," he began, his voice rough with sleeplessness but firm with a new resolve. "I no go lie, my mind on run everywhere. Fear don't catch me. The money matter. E day worry me so my chest day pain me." Adiz's eyes filled with tears. This was the prelude to rejection. "But," he continued, squeezing her hands, "but, you be my woman. This Pekin na our Pekin. We never plan am, but God plan am. So we go face him together." A sob escaped her. It was a sob of sheer, overwhelming relief. "We go keep am," Chitty declared, the statement solidifying into a promise as it left his lips. "We go be family. God day. We go hustle." We go safe. I go do any workway I see. Driver, loader, anything. We go manage. In that moment, under the weak glow of the single bulb, with the sounds of survival filtering in from the street, their future was decided. It was a promise built not on a foundation of financial security, but on the fragile, formidable bedrock of young love and desperate courage. They were going to be parents. They were going to be a family. The fear hadn't left Chitty's eyes, but it had been joined by a flicker of defiant responsibility. For Adiz, it was enough. It was everything. They hugged, a tight clutch of two people bracing against a storm they could not yet see the size of, united by a promise that felt, for now, unbreakable. The triple shock. The rains had come, turning the dusty lanes of Okota to viscous red streams. Adiz's time was upon her. The immense weight she carried now seemed to pull her downwards, a ripe fruit ready to drop. The flutters had become insistent, rhythmic movements that felt less like kicks and more like a deep, internal rearrangement. They could no longer save for a proper hospital. The tin, while lovingly filled, held only enough for the maternity home, a modest, three-room building with a faded sign, run by a formidable midwife named Mama Nkechi. The journey there in a hired kiki, with Adiz groaning through each pothole, was a small agony. Chitty held her hand, his face a mask of tense anticipation. Soon, Ada. Soon we go see our Pekin, he whispered, the words a hopeful chant. Mama Nkechi, a woman built like a tree trunk with eyes that missed nothing, took one look at Adiz's silhouette in the dim light of the reception and gave a knowing grunt. This one get 2 passengers, at least. Come. The room was clean but sparse. The air held the sharp, antiseptic smell of life and struggle. Adiz's labor was long and ferocious, a tempest that seemed to shake the very foundations of the small building. Chitty, banished to the narrow corridor, paced like a caged animal, his ears filled with her cries and Mama Nkechi's firm, encouraging commands. Hours bled together. The hopeful tension began to curdle into a cold, gnawing fear. This was more than any story he'd heard. Inside, Adiz was adrift on a sea of pain. Just as she felt she could bear no more, there was a final, tearing release. A first, thin wail pierced the air. Exhaustion flooded her. One fine girl, Mama Nkechi announced, her voice brisk with triumph. Before Adiz could even process it, a fresh, overwhelming wave of contraction seized her. A cry of shock and confusion tore from her throat. What'n day happen? Push, my daughter. He's still day. Mama Nkechi's eyes were wide now, not with alarm, but with a kind of professional astonishment. A second cry joined the first, slightly weaker, but insistent. Not twinzo. Another girl. God is good. Adiz wept, a muddle of relief and utter depletion. But her body, it seemed, was not finished. A third, relentless pressure built, a cruel and impossible tide. Mama Nkechi's hands moved swiftly, her face a study in concentration. Jesus of Nazareth. There is another one. Push. Now, with a final, supernatural effort that seemed to draw from the very last atom of her strength, Adiz delivered a third child. The cry was the softest of the three, a mewling, determined sound. The room fell into a stunned, buzzing silence, broken only by the trio of newborn whimpers. Triplets, Mama Nkechi breathed, the words sacred and heavy in the quiet room. 3 girls. Na blessing of abundance. Na God's handiwork. She cleaned and swaddled the babies, laying them side by side on Adiz's chest. They were impossibly small, wrinkled, their faces like closed flowers. 3 perfect, identical mouths seeking, 3 sets of tiny fingers curling. Adiz looked from one to the other, her mind blank, unable to wrap itself around the reality. 1 became 2. 2 became 3. The arithmetic of her life had just been catastrophically rewritten. Mama Nkechi, beaming, went to the door and pulled it open. Chitty nearly fell inside. My wife. My child. Go and thank your God, my son, Mama Nkechi declared, her voice booming with pride. Him no give you 1, him no give you 2. Him give you 3. 3 fine girls. See your wife, na strong warrior. She stepped aside. Chitty's eyes went from Adiz's pale, sweat-slicked face to the bundle in her arms. No, not a bundle. Bundles. A row of them. His smile, which had dawned like the sun, froze, then slowly disintegrated. His brain, wired for one outcome, short-circuited. He blinked, as if clearing a vision. The number wouldn't compute. 3. 3? He whispered, the word a dry leaf in his mouth. 3. Mama and Ketchy confirmed, clapping him on the back. Now your village people go dance now. But Chitty wasn't thinking of dances. He was thinking of the biscuit tin. Its meager contents, so carefully saved for one child, now mocked him. The mental ledger he had been keeping for months, one sack of diapers, one tin of formula, one set of clothes, exploded into a chaotic, impossible spreadsheet. Everything had to be multiplied by 3. The debts he had already quietly taken from the unsmiling moneylender under the bridge, Mr. Bassey, loomed in his mind, no longer a hill to climb but a sheer, unscalable cliff. He moved to Adi's side, his legs like wood. He looked down at his daughters. They were beautiful. A fierce, biological love pierced him, sharp and sweet. But right behind it, cold and clamping, came the tidal wave of pure, undiluted panic. His face, in that unguarded moment, lost all its color. The joy was there, but it was drowned, gasping under the weight of a terror so profound it felt like a physical blow to his chest. He managed to touch Adi's hair, to murmur, "Well done, my wife." But his eyes, as they met hers, held the stark, unvarnished truth of a man who has just seen the foundation of his world crack wide open. The fortress they had been building was not for a garrison of 3. It was a shelter for one, now hopelessly overwhelmed. The triple shock of their arrival, their number, and the sheer existential cost echoed in the silent room, louder than their first cries. The blessing had arrived, and it was terrifying. The vanishing act. The first 2 weeks were a hazy, sleep-deprived dreamscape of tiny cries, overwhelming needs, and a quiet, gathering dread. Chitty moved Adi's and the triplets from the maternity home to a single room in Ajagunal, a place where rent was cheap and walls were thin. The June 12th biscuit tin was emptied in a single, devastating trip to the market for essentials. 3 packs of the cheapest diapers, 3 small bottles, a giant tin of formula that seemed to shrink before their eyes. Adi's existed in a state of animal survival, her body feeding 3 mouths, her mind focused on the rotation of feeding, burping, and changing. She saw the shadow growing in Chitty, but she was too exhausted to chase it away. He was there, but he was receding. Mr. Bassey, the moneylender, found them first. He didn't need to ask for directions. Desperation had its own address. He appeared at their doorway one evening, a thin man in a worn leather jacket, his smile not touching his cold, calculating eyes. "Chitty, my friend. Congratulations, oh. I hear say you born triplets. God is great." His voice was like dry sandpaper. "I just come to wish you well, and to remind you of our small agreement. The first payment for the loan, it is due." Chitty's throat went dry. The loan, taken for one child's delivery, now felt like a noose. He stammered, "Mr. Bassey, you see the situation. I go need small time." "Time?" Mr. Bassey chuckled, a sound without warmth. "Time is money, my friend. And money is what you owe me. I am a businessman, not a charity. You have 2 more weeks. After that, the interest will grow teeth, and I will send my boys to collect it." His gaze swept over the bare room, the 3 baskets serving as cribs, resting on Adi's terrified face. He didn't need to say more. The threat hung in the air, thicker than the smell of baby formula. After he left, Chitty didn't speak for hours. He just sat on the floor, his head in his hands. The fear was no longer abstract. It had a face and a leather jacket. That night, he lay rigid beside Adi's, the baby's soft sounds like accusations. His mind ran in frantic, hopeless circles. His mechanic Olga had already advanced him 2 months' pay. His Kiki driving money was a drop in an ocean. His family in a Mudioka? They would see the triplets as a curse, a proof of his poor judgment, and would likely tell him to abandon the whole situation. The pressure was a physical vice, tightening each day. He jumped at every knock on the door. He started having nightmares of Mr. Bassey's boys, faceless, hulking shapes, taking everything, even the babies. He looked at his daughters, Amarachi, Chinello, Ifyananya, names Adi's had chosen for hope, thought, and love, and instead of joy, he felt only the terrifying weight of their vulnerability. He was not a shield. He was a crack in the wall letting the storm in. One morning, after a particularly loud argument with a creditor through the door, he turned to Adi's. Her eyes were hollow from lack of sleep. her wrapper hanging loose on her still recovering frame. She was trying to feed two babies at once, a look of fierce concentration on her face. "I'm going out," he said, his voice flat. "To find something. Anything." Adiz looked up, a flicker of her old trust in her eyes. "Chitty, we will manage. God will make a way." He nodded, unable to hold her gaze. He leaned down and, one by one, kissed the soft, downy heads of his three daughters. The scent of them, of milk and new skin, filled him with a love so acute it was indistinguishable from pain. He looked at Adiz, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the tired line of her mouth. He wanted to say 1,000 things, to apologize, to explain, to beg for forgiveness. But the words were ash in his mouth. All he could manage was a strangled, "I go buy Akara for your breakfast." He walked out the door. He did not go to the Akara stand. He walked past the mechanic workshop, past the Kiki Park. He walked with a steady, determined pace, as if in a trance, toward the motor park. He used the last of the coins in his pocket to buy a ticket for a bus going east, far away from Lagos, far away from Mr. Bassi, far away from the three crying mouths and the woman whose love he could no longer face. He did not look back. To look back would be to turn to salt, to be paralyzed by the magnitude of what he was doing. He simply vanished into the crowded, anonymous bowels of the park, leaving behind the smell of petrol and dust. Back in the room, the Akara never came. The sun climbed high. Adiz's initial worry curdled into a cold, familiar dread. When she mustered the courage to check under the thin mattress where he kept his few personal items, she found it. A single, folded sheet of paper from a child's exercise book. The words, scrawled in his unpracticed hand, were a blade to the heart. "Ada, I no fit. The debt too much. Fear don't finish me. I no get power to watch them suffer. Or for Bassi men to wound you. Forgive me. Chitty." The paper fluttered from her fingers. The betrayal was not a sudden storm, but the slow, chilling realization that the sun had gone out for good. The man who had promised to face anything with her had faced it, waited, and found himself wanting. A silent scream built in her chest, but she swallowed it, for the babies were crying. She picked up Ifeanyi, then Chinello, then Amarachi, rocking them with a mechanical rhythm. Her tears fell then, hot and silent, soaking into the cheap fabric of their blankets. She cried for the vanished future, for the broken promise, and for the terrifying, tripled reality she now faced utterly alone. The vanishing act was complete. All that remained was the overwhelming, echoing silence of abandonment, and the three tiny lives that now depended solely on her shattered strength. The master of management. The silence Chitty left behind was not empty. It was filled with a roaring, deafening absence. For days, Adiz moved through the one-room apartment in Ajagunal like a ghost, the triplets' cries the only sound that seemed real. The note, crumpled and stained with tears, was tucked away in the now-empty June 12th tin, a relic of a failed hope. Reality, cold and unyielding, demanded her surrender or her strength. She chose strength, not as a grand virtue, but as the only available currency. She became, by brutal necessity, a master of management. Her first calculation was spatial. The single room was partitioned in her mind. The sleeping corner, the mattress on the floor, the nursing corner, a stack of old clothes by the wall, the cleaning corner, a bucket and soap. Order was a defense against chaos. Her second, and eternal, calculation was financial. The money from the tin was gone. She sold Chitty's few remaining things, his extra pair of trousers, his second-hand radio. The meager proceeds bought a giant basin and a sturdy stick. She joined the army of women at the public tap, battling for water to sell. Pure water. Ice water, she would call, her voice competing with a dozen others, a baby strapped to her back with a wrapper, the other two left with a kindly, if overburdened, neighbor, Mama Bose, who accepted payment and washed dishes. Her days became a relentless circuit. Mornings were for fetching and selling water under the punishing sun. Afternoons, she took in washing from university students in a slightly better part of town, her hands scrubbing until they were raw and pruned, the smell of bleach and sweat a permanent perfume. Evenings, if her legs could still carry her, she would buy palm oil, flour, and pepper, and make akara and puff-puff, selling them by lantern light at the corner where the Kiki drivers parked. Every Kobo was a soldier enlisted in a desperate war. She developed a complex, internal accounting system. A 5 naira coin was not just 5 naira, it was one diaper. A 20 naira note was a quarter scoop of formula. 100 naira was a portion of rent, stashed away in a different hiding place each week. Food was the front line of this war. She discovered a nearby bukka where the owner, a gruff woman with a soft heart, would sell her yesterday's EBA at half price. She became an alchemist of leftovers, turning a single piece of dried fish into a pot of soup that had to last 3 days. Her greatest creation was triplet porridge, a thin, flavorful gruel of ground oats, blended ugu leaves for green, and a single, hard-boiled egg meticulously shredded to distribute its precious protein across 3 bowls. She watched them eat, her 3 beautiful girls, their faces growing fuller even as hers grew sharper. Amarachi, the thoughtful one, would try to share. "Mama, you chop?" "I already chop," NWAM. Adiz would lie, her stomach a hollow, gnawing pit. "See how my belly full?" She would pat an abdomen that was slowly collapsing in on itself. The hunger was a constant companion, a sharp-toothed creature that lived inside her ribs. At first, it was just an ache. Then it became a specific, burning pain, right in the center of her being, that flared when she smelled food she couldn't eat or when she went too long without a morsel. She drank copious amounts of water to fill the void. She chewed on sticks of sugarcane for the fleeting sweetness, swallowing the fibrous pulp. The girls thrived in their way. They learned to walk, holding onto each other for balance, a 3-legged unit of toddlerdom. They shared everything: clothes, toys, a discarded bottle cap, a brightly colored piece of foil, even sickness. But Adiz was withering. The vibrant young woman from Okoto was being sanded down to her essentials. Fierce eyes and a gaunt face, bones pushing against skin, and a will of forged iron. One afternoon, while pounding yam for a paying customer, a wave of dizziness so profound hit her that she saw black spots dancing before her eyes. The pestle slipped from her hands. She staggered to the side and vomited bitter, yellow bile into the gutter. The burning in her stomach was no longer just hunger. It was a focused, acidic fire. Mama Bose found her slumped against the wall. "Adiz, this thing you are doing to yourself, no good. You are turning to paper. You must eat." "The children, Mama Bose," Adiz whispered, wiping her mouth. "They must grow strong. I am their mother. It is my work." Her work was management. She managed time, money, hunger, and pain. She managed the sideways glances from neighbors who whispered about the woman abandoned with 3 burdens. She managed the loneliness that was a deeper ache than the ulcer forming inside her. She became a living ledger, where every debit from her own body was a credit to her daughter's future. She was their shelter, their provider, their sole defender. A fortress built not of bricks, but of denial, her own sustenance the consistent, conscious sacrifice she entered into the books. She was the master of management, and her own life was the price she had resolved, with silent, heartbreaking precision, to pay. The diagnosis. The fire in Adiz's stomach had become a permanent tenant, a smoldering coal that flared into an inferno with every skipped meal or sip of strong, cheap tea. It was no longer a mere pang of hunger. It was a precise, grinding agony that lived just below her breastbone. She carried it with her as she hawked her pure water, a secret torment behind her saleswoman's smile. At night, it burned brightest, a cruel companion to her exhaustion, making sleep a shallow, restless thing where dreams were of cool water and full plates that vanished upon waking. She tried her own remedies. She chewed agbu leaves, a bitter green paste that promised to cool the belly. She drank slimy concoctions of ground okra water. She avoided pepper and fried foods, which were luxuries she couldn't afford anyway. But the pain was a shrewd enemy, adapting and persisting. The final straw came at the market. She was haggling over the price of a small, bruised tomato, the last item to complete a meager stew for the girls. A wave of nausea, hot and sudden, washed over her. The world tilted. The vibrant colors of the pepper and plantain stalls blurred into a dizzying swirl. She felt a sharp, stabbing twist deep inside, and a taste of copper flooded her mouth. She stumbled, dropping the tomato, and clutched at a nearby pole holding up a tarpaulin roof. "Madam, you day all right?" the tomato seller asked, his annoyance shifting to concern as he saw the grayish pallor of her skin and the sheen of cold sweat on her forehead. Adiz couldn't speak. She managed a weak shake of her head, her vision tunneling. Mama Bose, who had been at a nearby grain stall, rushed over. Ada, Annie, what happened? With Mama Bose's firm arm around her, they half walked, half stumbled away from the market bustle to a quieter corner where a local chemist had set up shop. A wooden booth plastered with peeling posters for paracetamol and cough syrup. The chemist, a young man with kind eyes behind thick glasses, took one look at her and cleared off a stool for her to sit. After listening to her describe the pain, the location, the burning, the vomiting, the dizziness, he asked quietly, "Madam, you day eat well? You day take breakfast before you run your business?" Adiz looked down at her rough, calloused hands. The truth was too heavy to lift. "I day manage," she whispered, the universal Lagos phrase for enduring the unendurable. The chemist sighed, a sound of weary recognition. He didn't need a stethoscope to hear the story her body was shouting. He checked her blood pressure, which was worryingly low. He pressed gently on her abdomen, and she flinched as his fingers found the epicenter of the fire. "Madam," he said, his voice gentle but firm, removing his glasses. "This thing way you day feel, na ulcer. Okpali in your stomach. Eat on deep. See how you just day shake, and your eyes no get light. This one nah because of chronic hunger and worry. Your stomach day digest itself." The word landed in the quiet booth with the weight of a stone. Ulcer. It was a diagnosis, not just of pain, but of her entire life. A physical manifestation of every meal skipped, every anxiety swallowed, every silent tear shed over the past 7 years. He scribbled on a pad, tearing off the sheet. "You need these drugs. Omeprazole. It go help reduce the acid. But," he emphasized, leaning forward, "the medicine alone no go work. You must eat. Regularly. Small, but something must enter your stomach. No empty stomach for morning. If you no chop, this pain go kill you slowly." The ulcer fit burst. "You hear me." Adiz took the prescription, the paper feeling absurdly flimsy against the monumental instruction it carried. "You must eat." The sentence was a paradox, a cruel joke. How could she explain the mathematics of her home? That 3 bowls must be filled before one. That the sound of her children's satisfied sighs was the only nourishment her soul could afford? "How much for the drugs?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He told her. It was the price of a full day's Acra sales. It was a week's worth of eggs for the triplets. She nodded, a mechanical movement, and rose unsteadily. "I go come back," she said, the lie tasting as bitter as the bile in her throat. Outside, the Lagos sun was relentlessly cheerful. Mama Bose held her arm. "You heard the man, Ada. You have to take care of yourself. Who will care for those girls if you fall down?" "I know, Mama Bose," Adiz said, but her mind was already recalculating the ledger. The medicine was an expense she could not justify. The instruction to eat was an impossibility she could not solve. The diagnosis had given a name to her sacrifice, but it changed nothing. The fire in her belly was now a named companion. Okpali, the ulcer, a testament to her love, a scar of her management. She would learn to carry this burn too, just another weight in the endless burden of motherhood. The prescription stayed in her pocket, a paper monument to the chasm between medical advice and the brutal economics of survival. The master of management had just been given a report on her own bankruptcy, but the demands of the treasury, her 3 beautiful, growing girls, remained unchanged. The lockup shop. The ulcer's fire was a constant, low-grade hum in Adiz's core, a bitter counterpoint to the laughter of her 7-year-old daughters. She had mastered its language, when to sip water to douse the flare, when to straighten her spine and ignore its grip. The prescription from the chemist remained folded in the June 12th tin, a ghost of an impossible cure. Survival had moved beyond medicine. It demanded strategy. Hawking pure water and Acra was a war of attrition she was slowly losing. The competition was fierce, the profit margins thinner than paper. She needed a fortress, a stationary point from which to wage her battle. The idea of the lockup shop was born from a decade of dreaming and despair. It was Mama Bose who heard of it first. "My sister's husband's cousin," she explained in the intricate web of Lagos connections, "is traveling to abroad. He has a small shop by the road near the junction. You know, too big, but he gets strong door and roof no day leak. He wants someone to take him over small, pay rent monthly." Adiz's heart, a tired bird in a cage, beat against her ribs. A shop, a place of her own, not a spot on the ground, but 4 walls and a lock. The viewing was arranged. The shop was, as described, not too big, barely wider than 2 arm spans. But it had a solid metal roll-down door, a counter fashioned from planked wood, and a single shelf along the back wall. Sunlight streamed through its single window, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. To Adiz, it looked like a cathedral. The rent, however, was a mountain. It represented 4 months of her current combined income. She stood in the empty space, the smell of old cement and hope filling her nostrils. The triplets, who had come along, immediately claimed it. Chinello began tracing patterns in the dust on the floor. Ifeananya pretended to serve imaginary customers from behind the counter. Amarachi simply stood in the beam of light, a small, serious smile on her face. "We can manage it," Adiz whispered, not to Mama Bose, but to herself. It was a declaration of war on a new front. The next month was an exercise in extreme austerity. They ate nothing but gari and salt. She took on extra washing, her hands becoming red and cracked monuments to labor. She called in every faint favor owed, collecting small loans of 200 naira here, 500 there, from women who pitied her but also trusted her granite resolve. The triplets, sensing a mission, became scavengers of a sort, collecting discarded plastic bottles to sell to the recycling man. Their small earnings added to the growing pile with solemn ceremony. Finally, the day came. Adiz clutched the envelope of rent money, a bundle of crumpled notes of various denominations, tied with a piece of string. She handed it over to the agent, her hand trembling only slightly. In return, she received a single, shiny key. Stocking the shop was the next pilgrimage. With the last of her capital, she went to the Idamoda market, a calculating general procuring supplies. Her inventory was a study in necessity and low risk. Packets of biscuits, cabin and digestive, sweets in twisted cellophane, chin-chin in clear bags, chewing gum, matches, candles, and soft drinks, Fanta, Coke, and Sprite, which she would buy in crates and chill in a small, second-hand cooler bag with ice blocks. It was not a supermarket. It was a depot for small cravings and immediate needs. Opening day was a quiet revolution. She swept the floor until it was clean. She arranged the biscuits in neat rows, the sweets in a plastic bowl, the drinks gleaming in the cooler. She stood behind her counter as the morning traffic began to stream past. Okadas, kikis, women with trays on their heads. The first customer was a bus conductor, rushing over for a packet of gums and a Coke. The transaction was simple, magical. The chin of coins in her metal cash box was the most beautiful sound she had heard in years. Business, as predicted, was slow. Some days, only a handful of customers stopped. The profit from selling a single biscuit packet was a mere 5 naira. But it was steady. It was not subject to the rain that ruined Accra's sales or the whims of the water board that shut off the taps. It was hers. For the triplets, the shop became an extension of their home, a tiny kingdom. After school, they would do their homework on the floor behind the counter. They learned arithmetic by counting stock and making change for customers. They developed a keen sense of observation, noting who preferred Fanta to Coke, which biscuits sold fastest. And it was here, in this modest concrete box, that the world outside their struggle occasionally dipped a benevolent hand. Market women would stop to gossip and buy a sweet. School children would cluster for candies. And then there was him. The first time he came, it was unremarkable. A clean, dark blue Toyota Camry pulled over. A tall, older man in a simple but well-tailored senator attire stepped out. He moved with a calm, unhurried grace. He bought a bottle of Coke and a copy of The Guardian from the stack Adiz kept. He paid exact change, offered a slight, polite nod, and drove off. He returned a week later. And then again. His visits settled into a rhythm. Always in the evening, always the same purchase. He spoke little, but his eyes were kind, taking in the scene. The serious woman behind the counter, the 3 identical girls with their shared, watchful eyes. It was during one December evening, the harmattan haze painting the sky in dusty gold, that the ritual changed. After paying for his Coke and paper, he paused. He looked at the triplets, who were sorting bottle caps into colors. "You are 3, he stated, his voice a low, calm rumble. "Yes, sir," Amarachi answered for them, as she often did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 crisp 1,000 naira notes. He handed one to each girl. "For your brain," he said to Amarachi. For your smile. To Chinello, whose artwork was taped to the wall behind the counter. For your spirit. To Ifyananya, who was boldly building a tower of biscuit packets. They stared at the money, a fortune in their small hands. Thank you, sir, they chorused, stunned. He gave that slight nod again, got into his car, and disappeared into the twilight. Mama, did you see? Ifyananya whispered, clutching the note. I saw, Adiz said, her throat tight. It was an act of grace, so simple and profound it momentarily silenced the ever-present hum of worry in her mind. She didn't know his name. She didn't know where he came from. But every December thereafter, like a seasonal clockwork of kindness, he would appear. He became Baba December, a mysterious, benevolent spirit who affirmed that within the harsh economy of their lives, there was still room for unexpected, silent generosity. The lock-up shop was more than a business. It had become a sanctuary, and now, it was also a shrine where small miracles made their annual visit. Baba December's visits became the highlight of the triplets' year, a luminous fixed point in the constellation of their uncertain lives. They marked time by them. The harmattan would arrive, dusting everything with a fine, pale powder, and with it came the unspoken anticipation. Adiz noticed the pattern first. He is a man of habit, she told the girls, polishing the glass bottle of the Coke display until it shone. A serious man. See how his car is always clean, but not for show. See how he speaks. Few words, but each one has weight. He is from the village, you can hear it in his tongue, but Lagos has not spoiled him. The girls constructed their own mythologies around him. To Amarachi, the reader and thinker, he was a sage. Maybe he is a retired professor, she mused, arranging the newspapers neatly. Or a wise judge. He has that kind of face, like he knows many books. Chinello, the artist, was captivated by his demeanor. He moves like water, she said, sketching on a scrap of paper. Not slow, but smooth. And his eyes, they don't rush over you. They see everything. She had tried once to draw him from memory, capturing the strong line of his jaw, the quiet intensity of his gaze behind his spectacles. Ifyananya, the warrior, saw a protector. He is strong, she declared, practicing her posture to mimic his straight back. Not like those area boys who shout. A quiet strong, like a tree that no storm can shake. His ritual was precise. The blue Toyota Camry would glide to a stop by the roadside, never blocking traffic. He would step out, his senator attire always immaculate, his shoes, simple leather loafers, polished to a deep, respectful shine. He never hurried. He would approach the shop, his presence causing a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like a calm settling over their tiny, hectic world. Good evening, he would greet, his voice a low, warm baritone. Good evening, sir. The triplets would chorus, standing a little taller. Adiz would give a respectful nod. Welcome, sir. He would buy one bottle of Coca-Cola, never Pepsi, and one copy of The Guardian, always folded neatly. He paid with exact change, his movements economical. But it was what came after the transaction that defined him. The first time he gave them money, it had been a shock. The second December, they were prepared, hope buzzing in their veins like electricity. He didn't disappoint. After paying, he would turn to them, a slight, almost imperceptible smile softening his features. He studied them, though they didn't know he had learned to tell them apart. Amarachi by her watchful stillness, Chinello by the dreamy tilt of her head, Ifyananya by her alert, defiant chin. He would reach into the inner pocket of his agbada and produce 3 fresh 1,000 naira notes. The sound of the crisp paper was a promise kept. To Amarachi, he would say, for your brain. Use it to learn something new. He once noticed her struggling with an English comprehension book and, the following week, a second-hand but pristine dictionary appeared on the shop counter beside his Coke. He never mentioned it. To Chinello, holding her latest drawing of a butterfly on a gmelina leaf, he said, for your smile. And for the beauty your hands create. He once pointed to a specific shade of blue in her sky. That is the color of the lagoon at dawn, he remarked, a personal, poetic observation that made her heart sing. To Ifyananya, he would say, for your spirit, may it never break. Once, when a rude customer had tried to shortchange Adiz, Ifyananya had spoken up with shocking boldness for a 7-year-old. Baba December, waiting quietly, had given her an almost imperceptible nod of approval that felt like a knighthood. The money was a fortune. It bought school shoes, new uniforms, a special pot of soup with meat for a whole week. But it was the words that were the real treasure. He saw them, not as a collective burden or a curious set of triplets, but as three distinct individuals with unique gifts. In a world that often saw them as a single, overwhelming problem, Baba December acknowledged their separate souls. After the gifts, he would nod to Adiz. "Take care of yourself and these jewels." "God bless you, sir," she would reply, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name, gratitude mixed with a painful ache, for his kindness highlighted the absence of any other. Then he would get into his car and drive away, never looking back, leaving behind a silence filled with warmth and wonder. They knew nothing else about him, not his name, not where he lived, not what he did. He was a mystery wrapped in kindness, a seasonal angel who operated on a calendar of his own making. In the lore of the triplets, he was not just a man, he was a principle, a proof that goodness existed in a tangible form, that it could roll up in a blue car, speak in a calm voice, and with three simple acts of seeing, fortify their spirits for the long, hard months to come. He was Baba December, and his anticipated visit was a small, sacred festival of hope in their year. The collapse. The harmattan had faded, replaced by the leaden, humid heat that preceded the rains. Life in the lock-up shop had settled into its fragile rhythm. Adiz's ulcer was a familiar, if unwelcome, tenet, a pain she managed with sips of water and sheer willpower, its fire-banked but never fully extinguished. She was a master of concealment, hiding the wince when a sharp twist bloomed beneath her ribs, forcing a smile for her girls. The day of the collapse began like any other. The morning was spent sorting stock, the afternoon sun baking the metal roof of the shop until the air inside swam with heat waves. Adiz was rearranging the crate of soft drinks, her movements slow and deliberate. The triplets were at school. A strange, heavy fatigue had clung to her all day, a weight in her bones that felt deeper than the usual tiredness. Then it came. Not the familiar, burning ache, but something entirely new, a swift, internal tear, a sensation so sharp and profound it felt as if a hook had been yanked deep inside her abdomen. A gasp was torn from her lips, more of shock than pain at first. She dropped the Fanta bottle she was holding. It shattered on the concrete floor, a burst of sticky brown liquid around her feet. The pain followed, a tsunami that obliterated thought. It was a white-hot, rending agony that centered low in her belly and radiated outwards, seizing her muscles and buckling her knees. She crumpled behind the counter, her body curling around the epicenter of the catastrophe. She couldn't scream. The pain had stolen her breath. She could only make a thin, high sound, like a wounded animal. Vision blurred, then darkened at the edges. She was aware of the gritty concrete against her cheek, the smell of spilled soda and dust. The world narrowed to a tunnel of excruciating sensation. She tried to call for help, but her voice was a threadbare whisper lost in the noisy street outside. Fate, in the form of Mama Bose, intervened. She was passing by on her way from the market, a bag of ugwa in her arms. She didn't see Adiz, but she saw the unusual sight of the shop's counter unattended and the open crate of drinks. A prickle of unease made her peer over. Adiz? Eneni. She rushed in, her maternal bulk moving with sudden speed. Finding Adiz on the floor, pale as chalk and trembling violently, Mama Bose let out a cry. "Alyawami. Ada, what'd happen?" Adiz couldn't answer. Her eyes were screwed shut, her hands pressed into her stomach. Mama Bose didn't hesitate. She shouted into the street, her powerful voice cutting through the din. "Help. Somebody help. This woman is dying." A crowd gathered quickly, curious, concerned faces peering in. A young Okada rider, moved by the urgency, maneuvered his bike to the front. "Mama, bring her. I go carry her to General Hospital." With the help of two market men, they lifted Adiz, now semi-conscious with pain, onto the back of the motorcycle. Mama Bose climbed on behind, wrapping her arms around Adiz to hold her upright, a human brace against the agony of the journey. The Okada weaved through the chaotic traffic, horns blaring at their frantic progress. At the General Hospital, the scene was one of organized indifference. The casualty ward was a tableau of suffering, cries, moans, the hurried steps of overworked nurses. The Okada rider helped Mama Bose half-carry, half-drag Adiz to the registration desk. A clerk behind a glass partition barely looked up. Card, he droned. She no get card. She just collapsed. Mama Bose pleaded, sweat pouring down her face. You have to register. Fill this form. Then you go to accounts for deposit. Deposit? How much? She need doctor now. The clerk sighed, the sigh of a man who has seen too much desperation to be moved by it. He quoted a figure for the initial deposit. It was a sum that made Mama Bose's heart sink. It was more money than she had on her, more than she knew Adiz had in the world. A nurse came over, took a cursory look at Adiz's pallor and the way she guarded her abdomen. Possible ruptured cyst or ectopic. She needs scanning and likely surgery. Time is important. Who is responsible? All eyes turned to Mama Bose. The weight of responsibility, financial and moral, settled on her shoulders with crushing force. She thought of her own children, her own precarious budget. The hospital's bureaucracy was a machine that required the fuel of cash to start, and she had none to give. The kindness that had made her stop and help now warred with the brutal logic of survival. She looked at Adiz's ashen face, a mask of silent torment. She looked at the impatient clerk, the busy nurse. The system was a cliff, and she stood at the edge. With a heart full of shame and sorrow, she made her choice. She gently propped Adiz against a wall on a bench. She leaned close, her voice a tortured whisper in Adiz's ear. Ada, my sister, I am sorry. I no get the money. I go send word to the girls. God go help you, my sister. God go help you. And with that, she turned and melted into the crowded hallway, leaving Adiz alone in the buzzing, uncaring hive of the hospital. The collapse was complete, not just of Adiz's body, but of the fragile network of neighborly aid. She was now officially a statistic, a patient without a patron, adrift on a hard bench with an internal injury ticking like a bomb, at the mercy of an institution whose first question was never about pain, but about payment. The little ghosts. News of their mother's collapse reached the triplets like a cold wind through a cracked wall. Mama Bose, her face etched with guilt and pity, found them returning from school, their uniforms tidy, their hearts light with the day's small lessons. Her words, your mother, hospital, she is very sick, turned the afternoon sun to ash. For the first night, they huddled together in the empty room, a silence more frightening than any noise pressing in on them. The familiar sounds of their mother moving, the soft hum of her presence, were gone, replaced by a void that echoed with their terror. They didn't cry. They were too stunned for tears. They just held on to each other, three parts of a single, shattered whole. By morning, instinct took over. They were a unit, and their commander was missing. They had to find her. Holding hands, a tiny, solemn procession, they navigated the bustling, indifferent streets towards the general hospital, a place they knew only from fearful stories. The looming, stained concrete building smelled of antiseptic, urine, and despair, a smell that would become synonymous with this period of their lives. They found her in the female medical ward, a long hall lined with beds, each holding its own private tragedy. Adiz was on a cot by a window, for drip in her arm, her eyes closed. She looked smaller, deflated, her skin a worrying gray against the white sheets. A piece of paper was clipped to the foot of her bed, a red stamp screaming, bills unpaid, treatment withheld. Mama, Amarachi whispered, the first to approach. Adiz's eyes fluttered open. Seeing them, a weak light flickered within, immediately dimmed by a wave of shame and pain. My children, you should not be here. But they were here. This became their new, grim routine. They became ghosts in the hospital corridors, small, silent, and haunting. They learned to slip past the nurse's station, to move unseen. They would take turns sitting on the hard stool by her bed, holding her limp hand, while the others stood guard or searched for a drinking cup to fetch her water from the communal tank. They witnessed the harsh economy of the ward. Nurses, overworked and under-resourced, were not unkind, but they were pragmatic. Patient with the red paper, they would say, their voices cool. We cannot give the strong pain medication until the account is settled. We cannot schedule the surgery. You must find the money. The triplets learned the language of medical limbo. Ruptured ovarian cyst, internal bleeding, risk of sepsis. The words were too big for them, but the meaning was clear. Their mother was breaking inside, and a gatekeeper called money stood between her and repair. Their own survival became a desperate, day-to-day scavenging. They would trek back to the lockup shop. With the small key on a string around Ifyunanya's neck, they would open it, not to sell, but to raid their own inventory. A packet of cabin biscuits became a day's meal, shared among the three of them and crumbled into their mother's weak palm. A bottle of Fanta was a precious sip of sweetness to cut through the medicinal taste in her mouth. Hunger, an old foe, became acute. They grew thinner, their uniforms hanging looser. Shadows pooled under their eyes. But a fiercer hunger drove them, the hunger for their mother's safety. They learned to interpret the whispers of the ward, the grim nods of the doctors. The red-stamped paper was a death sentence in slow motion. They would walk home in the fading light, past food stalls where the smell of frying akara was a torture. They slept in a pile on their mattress, the empty space where their mother should be a physical coldness. They didn't speak much. Words were too heavy. Their communication was in touches, a hand squeezed, a head leaned on a shoulder. They were three threads, worn dangerously thin, holding onto each other to keep from unraveling completely. They were the little ghosts, pale, silent, moving between a home that was no longer a sanctuary and a hospital that was not a place of healing, but a holding cell for the indigent. Their world had shrunk to the space between their mother's sickbed and the shop that held their meager sustenance, a haunted corridor where their only mission was to bear witness and to silently will their mother to live, while the world waited for a payment they could never make. The kneeling supplication. 3 days had bled into 4, a seamless stretch of despair. The hunger was now a sharp, constant presence, a live wire in their bellies. The biscuits from the shop were nearly gone, and the Fanta bottle they'd been nursing was down to sticky dregs. A quiet, frantic energy had replaced their initial shock. Action, any action, was preferable to the slow, suffocating dread of watching their mother fade on that hospital cot. They decided on a final raid of the shop. Maybe there was a hidden packet of chin-chin at the back of the shelf, or some coins that had rolled under the counter. The walk there was silent, their small hands linked. The vibrant chaos of Ajagunal, the blaring music, the shouting traders, the revving engines, felt like it was happening behind glass. They were in a silent, cold bubble of their own making. Ifyunanya, the keeper of the key, fished the string from under her dress. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled violently as she tried to fit the small key into the padlock on the shop's metal door. The metal scratched and protested. Chinello leaned in, her breath held, as if she could will it open. Amarachi scanned the street, her eyes hollow, looking for nothing and everything. It was in this moment of fumbling desperation that the miracle arrived, not with fanfare, but with the soft, familiar purr of a well-kept engine. A dark blue Toyota Camry pulled to its usual spot by the roadside. For a heartbeat, time froze. The three girls turned as one, their faces lifting from the stubborn lock. They saw him, Baba December. He looked exactly as he always did, calm, composed, an island of order in the sea of their chaos. But to them, he was no longer just the kind December man. He was a vision, the only benevolent force they had ever known, appearing in their deepest hour of need. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his senator sleeve. He saw them immediately, their disheveled hair, their dusty, too large uniforms, the profound, grown-up grief etched on their 7-year-old faces. His usual slight smile did not appear. His brows drew together in concern. "Good afternoon," he greeted, but his tone was a question. "Where is your mother?" The sound of his voice, that deep, calm rumble that had always spoken of gifts and encouragement, shattered the last of their composure. They did not plan it. No signal passed between them. It was a single, desperate thought made flesh. As one, they moved away from the shop door. They took 2 steps towards him, and then their knees gave way. It was not a faint, but a deliberate, synchronized collapse of hope. They sank to the dusty ground before him, their small bodies folding into postures of ancient supplication. The red earth stained their knees and the hems of their dresses. Amarachi, the thinker, tried to articulate their logic, but only a raw plea emerged. "Baba, please, they say we must pay the hospital." Chinello, the feeler, could only voice the core terror, her words a sob. "Mama day there, she go dio." Ifyunanya, the warrior, lifted a face streaked with dust and tears, her eyes locking onto his with a terrifying intensity. She spoke not to his kindness, but to his strength, stating the absolute truth of their world. "You be the only good man we know. Help us, Baba." We no get anybody. They wrapped their thin arms around his legs, not in restraint, but in a final, complete offering of their trust. They were not begging for money for sweets or books. They were begging for a life. The sheer, tripled force of their despair, their utter abandonment, and their blind faith in him alone struck Chief Adewale Osanuga with the force of a physical blow. He looked down at the three small heads bowed at his feet, felt the desperate clutch of their hands, and saw in their posture the mirrored image of a world that had brought them to their knees. He did not hesitate. He did not ask for details or explanations. The sight was the only evidence he needed. His own heart, a seasoned heart that had built an empire and weathered many storms, cracked open. In a voice that was thicker, rougher than they had ever heard it, he issued a command that was also a lifeline. "Enter motor," he said. "Show me the settled account." The drive to the General Hospital was a silent, charged journey. The triplets sat in the back of the Toyota Camry, a car that suddenly felt like a spaceship, so clean and quiet compared to the Okadas and dusty streets they knew. The scent of polished leather and air freshener was alien, but the solid presence of Baba December in the driver's seat was an anchor. They did not speak, only pointed the way with small, urgent gestures. He parked not in the chaotic visitors area, but directly in front of the main administrative entrance, a place of authority. He stepped out, and the girls scrambled after him, clinging to his shadow like ducklings to a mother hen. His calm demeanor had shifted into something purposeful, magnetic. He moved through the crowded, grimy corridors not with aggression, but with an unassailable certainty that parted the sea of people and bureaucratic inertia. They went straight to the accounts office, bypassing the long, weary queue. A clerk looked up, irritation plain on his face. "You have to join the line. I am here for the bill of Adiz Mba," Chief Osanuga stated, his voice low but cutting through the office din. He placed a simple, elegant business card on the counter. The clerk glanced at it, and his expression changed. The name Adewale Osanuga, Osanuga Cement and Sons meant something, even here. The patient with the triplets? The clerk stammered, pulling a file. He presented the daunting total, a figure that represented an impossible mountain to the girls. Baba December did not flinch. He did not haggle or question. He simply took out a checkbook from his inner pocket, uncapped a pen, and wrote with swift, decisive strokes. The rip of the check being torn out was the most beautiful sound the triplets had ever heard. He handed it over. "Clear it, now, and bring me a receipt." "But sir, the process it takes." "Now," he repeated, the single word leaving no room for argument. While the clerk scurried away, Chief Osanuga turned to the girls. "Take me to her." They led him to the ward. The sight that greeted him, Adiz, a shell of a woman drowning in starch-white sheets, the red-stamped paper a vulgar scar on her bed, tightened his jaw. He approached, and Adiz's feverish eyes focused on him, a strange, dignified man flanked by her daughters. Confusion and a faint, wild hope warred in her gaze. He did not introduce himself. He simply took her frail, too light hand in both of his. It was a gesture of profound respect that made the nearby nurses pause. "Your daughters," he said, his voice firm yet gentle, carrying to her through the fog of pain, "are mighty warriors. They have fought for you today. Now, you will get well." He turned to the senior nurse who had approached. "Who is the consultant in charge? I wish to speak with him immediately regarding Mrs. Mba's surgery." His tone was not that of a petitioner, but of a man accustomed to ensuring things are done, and done correctly. In the consultant's office, he was polite but immovable. "Money is no longer an object. I want the best surgeon available. I want her scheduled for the operation today. Is that understood?" He did not raise his voice, but the authority in it was absolute. Assurances were given, orders were written. He returned to Adiz's bedside. From a different pocket, he produced a thick, sealed white envelope. He placed it on the bedside locker, his hand resting on it for a moment. "This is not for the hospital," he said, his eyes holding hers. "That account is settled. This is for your feeding, for your strength. Use it only for that." He then looked at the triplets, who were watching him, awestruck. He placed a hand briefly on each of their heads, a blessing, a benediction. "Be strong for your mother," he murmured. And then, he turned and walked away. He did not linger for thanks or tears. His work, as he saw it, was done. The machinery of healing, once jammed by poverty, had been oiled and set in motion by his will. He had assessed the debt, a debt not of his making, and he had settled it in full. He moved back through the corridors, a solitary figure of immense, quiet power, leaving behind a wake of stunned silence and a new, palpable atmosphere of possibility. At the ward entrance, he paused, glanced back once at the huddle of four, the mother and her three little warriors, gave a final, slight nod, and then disappeared around the corner. In the sudden quiet, the only sound was the distant, efficient clatter of preparations beginning for Adi's surgery. The red-stamped paper was gone. The account was settled. The impossible had been made simple by a man who saw a need and acted, without fanfare, without condition, concluding a transaction of grace that would redefine the meaning of wealth for those four souls forever. The final command. The world had shifted on its axis. The suffocating dread that had filled the hospital ward was gone, replaced by a flurry of purposeful activity. Nurses moved with new briskness around Adi's bed, removing the condemning red paper, checking her vitals with focused intent, prepping her for the surgery that was now imminent. A doctor, the consultant himself, had come and spoken in low, reassuring tones. The atmosphere was no longer one of neglect, but of urgent care. The triplets stood together, a little apart from the commotion, their eyes fixed on the empty doorway where Baba December had vanished. The magnitude of what had just happened was a tide still washing over them, leaving them trembling on a new shore. Relief was there, a profound, dizzying wave of it, but it was tangled with a new, acute anxiety, the fear of his permanent departure. Ifyananya was the first to break from the trance. Her spirit, the one he had praised, could not bear the unresolved ending. "Wait," she cried, her small voice cutting through the clinical hum. She dashed out into the corridor, her sisters instantly at her heels. They saw him, a tall, receding figure moving with that steady, unhurried pace toward the main exit, the sunlight from the doors framing him. "Baba! Baba, wait!" He heard. He stopped and turned. Seeing them running, their faces alight with a desperate gratitude, he waited. He did not smile, but his expression was soft, patient. They skidded to a halt before him, breathing heavily. Ifyananya, the spokesperson in this crisis, spoke for them all. "Baba, what is your name?" The question was a plea for identity, for something to hold on to. He looked down at her, then at Amarachi and Chinello. "That is not important," he said gently. "But how we go, thank you?" Chinello asked, her artist soul seeking a shape for their debt. "How we go pay you back? We promise we will. We go work." A small, sad smile touched his lips then. He understood the weight of a promise to them, the gravity of a debt. He knew it could become a burden. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to the floor of the hospital corridor. He knelt, bringing his eyes level with theirs, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. In that moment, the billionaire in the fine senator cloth was not above them. He was with them. He looked at each girl in turn, his gaze seeing deep into the core of them. The thinker, the dreamer, the warrior. "The only repayment I need," he said, his voice low and clear, each word chosen with care, "is for you three to grow up strong." He reached out and tapped Amarachi's forehead lightly. "Use this." He touched his own chest over his heart. "And this." He turned to Chinello. "Do not let the world steal your sight for beauty. Create it." Finally, he looked at Ifyananya, his eyes holding a particular intensity. "Protect them, and let your spirit protect you." He paused, letting the individual charges settle. Then he delivered the final, overarching command, the one that would echo through the rest of their lives. "Become great women, not for fame, but for substance." And then, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that they had to lean in to hear, "One day, when you see someone else on their knees, you will remember this day. And you will not ask for their name. You will not wait for December. You will simply lift them up." He placed his hands on their small shoulders, a weight that felt like an anointing. "That is how you will settle my account. That is the only thanks I will ever need." He held their gazes for a long moment, ensuring the words were seared into their souls. Then, he rose smoothly to his feet. He gave them one last, long look, a look that was both a farewell and a commissioning. Without another word, he turned and walked out through the hospital doors into the blinding afternoon sun. He did not look back. The triplets stood rooted to the spot, the cool of the linoleum seeping through their thin shoe soles. The corridor noise rushed back in. The squeak of trolley wheels, the distant page on the intercom. But his words hung in the air around them, a tangible legacy, more valuable than any envelope of cash. He had given them their mother's life, and in the same breath, he had given them a purpose for their own. The transaction was complete. The debt was not a chain, but a charge. They were to pay it forward, in kindness, across a lifetime. It was his final and greatest command. The empty December. The surgery was a success. The offending cyst, swollen and treacherous, was removed. The internal bleeding was stopped. In the clean, quiet recovery room, Adiz began the slow journey back to herself, fortified not just by medicine, but by a mystery. The envelope Baba December left contained a sum of money that felt mythical, enough for months of rent, nutritious food, new school supplies, and even a small stock refreshment for the shop. It was a bridge back to life. Recovery at home was a different kind of warmth. For the first time in years, their one room was filled with the smell of healing herbs and onugbu soup rich with goat meat, not just the ghost of hunger. Adiz's color returned, the gray pallor replaced by a healthy brown. The sharp angles of her face softened. She could sit up and laugh, a sound the triplets had almost forgotten. They doted on her, bringing her water, plumping her pillow, their every action infused with a reverent joy. The lockup shop reopened. This time, the opening was triumphant. Neighbors who had whispered now came to buy and to marvel, asking cautious questions about the big man in the Camry. Adiz, her dignity restored, would simply say, "God sent a helper," and leave it at that. The triplets worked with a new fervor, arranging biscuits with military precision, their hearts light. They were not just managing, they were building. As the months rolled by, their lives transformed. They ate 3 meals a day. Their school uniforms were new and crisp. Amarachi's books were covered in neat brown paper. Chinello had a proper set of colored pencils. Ifyinanya's worn shoes were replaced. The ever-present hum of existential fear was gone, replaced by the ordinary worries of school tests and childhood squabbles. They were, for the first time, normal. But as the dry harmattan winds began to blow, dusting the city in a familiar haze, a new anticipation took root, sweet and sharp. They would tidy the shop extra carefully. They practiced what they would say. Amarachi planned to show him her top-of-the-class report card. Chinello worked on a special drawing, a portrait of their family, with a tall, kindly figure standing protectively behind them. Ifyinanya rehearsed a speech of gratitude, determined to be articulate. December arrived. They watched the road. Every blue car that passed made their hearts leap. Days slipped by. The Christmas decorations went up in the market, and the usual festive chaos unfolded, but their eyes were constantly drawn to the spot where his Toyota always parked. One evening, a blue car did pull over. They rushed to the front, only to slump in disappointment. It was a different make, a different man. The disappointment was a physical ache. Maybe he is busy, Amarachi reasoned, the thinker trying to logic away the dread. Maybe he will come later in the month. But the month deepened. The 25th came and went, a bittersweet celebration. They ate a good chicken meal, but the chair they had symbolically kept empty in their hearts felt cavernous. By the 31st, a quiet certainty had settled over them. He was not coming. The rumor reached them in January, carried not on a swift wind, but seeping slowly through the porous walls of the community like a stain. It came from the market women, from the drivers at the park who had connections to Ijibuode. It was murmured in pieces, gathered by Mama Bose with a grim face. That man, the one with the Camry, they say he was a big Oga from the village. He went for a family meeting after Christmas. There was food, a big feast. He fell sick when he returned home to Lagos. Very fast sickness. Stomach pains. The whispers grew darker, more specific, sibilant with a knowing horror. They say his people, his own brothers, their minds were poisoned with jealousy long before the food was. All that money, and he had no son of his own. They wanted his shares in the business. The doctors said it was acute poisoning. Nothing could be done. The triplets heard these fragments and fitted them together into a terrible, coherent whole. They did not speak of it to Adiz. They held the knowledge between them, a sacred and awful trust. The man who had lifted them from their knees had been struck down for his goodness. His kindness, so vast and quiet, had been answered by the world's smallest, most venomous evil. That December, and every December after, The space by the roadside remained empty. The festival of hope was over, replaced by a solemn vigil of memory. The miracle they had received was now shadowed by a martyrdom. They had their mother, their health, their renewed future, all bought at a price they never intended, paid by a man they could never thank. The lesson was complete, and it was devastating. Light could indeed attract not just moths, but vipers. And the purest generosity could make it a target. The empty December was a silent testament to that brutal, beautiful truth. The legacy of kindness. The empty Decembers stretched into years, each one a silent lesson in the complex architecture of loss and gift. The triplets carried the secret of Baba December's fate like a sacred, heavy locket close to their hearts, its weight shaping their growth. The world, seeing them flourish, saw only a remarkable turnaround. They did not speak of poison or jealousy at the village meeting. They spoke of a scholarship, a lucky break. But internally, the whisper of his fate was the furnace in which their resolves were tempered. They obeyed his command. They grew. Amarachi, whose brain he had prized, devoured knowledge with a focused intensity that startled her teachers. The memory of the red-stamped hospital paper, the clinical terms for her mother's suffering, became a compass needle. She studied biology, then medicine, specializing in gastroenterology. Dr. Amarachi Mba became renowned not just for her skill, but for her demeanor, a calm, unhurried authority that reminded some older nurses of a certain benefactor long ago. She established a foundation that quietly covered surgical costs for women with gynecological emergencies, focusing on single mothers. She never asked for their names. She simply settled the account. Chinello, whose sight for beauty he had cherished, found her canvas in the world. Her art evolved from sketches of butterflies to vast, stunning murals that transformed drab hospital walls, chaotic motor parks, and orphanage courtyards. Her paintings were stories of resilience. A woman's hands cradling triplets, a tall tree providing shade, a light piercing a dark wood. She used her fame to fund art therapy programs and to buy supplies for street kids, seeing in their doodles the same spark Baba December had seen in hers. She created beauty, as he had instructed, and she gave it away. Ifyananya, whose spirit he had fortified, channeled her ferocity into the courtrooms of Lagos. She became a barrister, a small, immovable force in a wig and gown, specializing in the defense of the poor and the wronged, evicted tenants, cheated market women, abandoned children. Her voice in court was a weapon, but her legal aid was free. When she saw injustice, she did not wait for a petition. She intervened, her spirit a shield for the kneeling. She fought the dragons of indifference, a warrior in his name. Their mother, Adiz, lived to see it all. She saw her girls become the women Baba December had foreseen. The lock-up shop, eventually, was closed, not from failure, but because its purpose had been fulfilled. Adiz's ulcer, properly fed and cared for, became a dormant memory. Her greatest pride was not in their degrees or accolades, but in their character, the quiet, decisive way they extended a hand. And every year, as December's Harmattan haze returned, they each performed a secret ritual. It was their true celebration of Christmas, their sacrament. Amarachi would visit a public hospital, unknown and unannounced. She would find a family huddled in despair by a bedside, a red-stamped form in their hands. Through a trusted social worker, she would ensure the bill was paid in full, the surgery greenlit, leaving only a note, "For your strength. Recover well." Chinello would seek out a struggling street vendor or a young, talented apprentice with worn-out tools. She would anonymously pay for a year's rent for a stall or deliver a complete set of new tools with a simple card, "For the beauty you will create." Ifyananya would take on a pro bono case with a particular urgency in December, defending someone with no voice against a powerful, crushing system, ensuring they were home for the holidays. They never coordinated these acts. They never spoke of them to each other. But they knew. It was their inherited debt, being paid forward in the currency he had prescribed. Actionable, anonymous grace. The legacy of the homeless triplets and the billionaire was not a fairy tale. It was a blueprint. Baba December had shown them that true wealth was a verb, an energy that could flow from a car window to a dusty roadside, from a hospital check to a life reclaimed. He had also shown them, through his cruel end, that such light could attract darkness, but that the correct response was not to hide the light, but to multiply it. Years later, standing together at the unveiling of a new children's wing Amarachi had funded, adorned with Chinello's murals, with Ifeananya having handled the legal land rights, they looked at their work. They were no longer little ghosts. They were forces of nature. Amarachi broke their comfortable silence. He would be proud, she said softly, not needing to say his name. He is, Chinello corrected, her artist's soul feeling the truth of it. Ifeananya simply nodded, her fierce eyes glistening. The account is never fully settled, she said. And that is the point. They had been lifted from their knees. Now, it was their lifelong vocation to lift others. The chain of kindness, tested by poison and forged in grief, remained unbroken. It was a quiet, powerful empire he had left behind, not of cement, but of compassion, and it was run by 3 queens who had once been beggars, forever paying forward a debt that had saved their souls. The story had ended, but the legacy was a living, breathing, ever-expanding thing. And so, the story of the triplets, their mother's unwavering sacrifice, and the quiet billionaire who appeared like a seasonal angel finds its resting place here. But as we have seen, a story like this never truly ends. It transforms. It becomes action. It becomes a legacy written not in ink, but in healed bodies, in captured beauty, in justice served, and in kindness passed from one hand to another. Baba December's final command was the seed. In the fertile soil of the triplets' spirits, watered by their mother's tears and nurtured by their own hard-won strength, it grew into a forest of goodwill, offering shade and shelter to those who came after them. This narrative reminds us that our greatest trials can become the foundation for our greatest purpose. It shows that help can arrive from the most unexpected quarters, and that the true measure of a gift is not in its size, but in the chain of grace it ignites. To you, who have followed this journey from a dusty roadside in Ajagunal to the halls of healing and justice, we say a heartfelt thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for witnessing their sorrow and their triumph. Thank you for holding space for Adi's strength, for Chitty's failure, for the triplets' desperation, and for Chief Asanuga's devastating generosity. In witnessing, you have become a part of this chain. May their story inspire you to see the kneeling souls around you, and may you find your own way to lift them up. The account remains open. The legacy continues. Go and be a blessing. Thank you.